So welcome back, everybody. I am so thrilled to be here today and recording a podcast with somebody that I think you all will find very, very interesting. My guest today is Phyllis Leavitt. And Phyllis Leavitt's been a psychotherapist her whole life. It's her career. And so she's really, right in line with me in this whole mental well-being trek that we're all on. But she's written a book, a new book, and it is really interesting to me. And it's a topic that I think maybe many of you will find interesting from a psychotherapist, psychological point of view. The book is entitled America in Therapy. And then there's a little sub of a new approach to hope and healing for a nation in crisis, which I love the word hope. And I love the idea that we have hope. So welcome, Phyllis. I'm so glad you're here. And I just want to really have you say whatever else about that briefly that you want to kind of get us kick-started.
Sure. And thank you so much for having me here today. I love talking to people who speak this language, and I love talking to people who don't speak this language. So, I've been a psychotherapist for my entire career. And really, what the short version is that having worked with children and families and couples and individual adults, what I found is that you're always working with family systems, no matter what piece of the family you're working with, because we're so influenced and conditioned by the role models and the values and the behaviors of the people that we grow up with intimately. And what I realized is that our family is not just, and I'm not the only person who realized this, but our family is not just our family of origin. It's our friend circle, it's our community, it's our schools, it's our places of business, and it's our country. All groupings of people actually work on family dynamics, either for better or for worse. And having worked with so much on a continuum, but having worked with so much abuse and neglect of some kind, mental, emotional, sexual, physical violence, dysfunction, addiction. And let me just throw this in really quickly, and I wonder if this is your experience too. There's a lot more pain and suffering on a mental health, emotional level in our country than I think most people are aware of. There are many people who are still functioning and they look fine on the outside. They go to work, they feed their kids, they walk their dog, and they're in pain from unhealed trauma in childhood or in their communities or in our nation. And I felt it was really, really important to bring that family therapy lens to looking at what's going on in our country today with such escalating violence and divisiveness and discrimination and injustice, that these are dysfunctional family dynamics, and they can be understood by looking through the family lens. And the last piece I'll say real quick is that they could also be healed by employing the best of what we know helps interrupt the cycle of dysfunction and abuse and neglect in individual families. These things could be applied on a national level if we had the understanding, we had the will, and we had the support to do that.
Yeah, so we will definitely get to sort of how we do that, because I think that is amazing. And being hopeful about this is I think a message that a lot of people want to hear, because it's, you hear about it everywhere. You hear about it on every news program. You hear about it constantly, about this divisiveness, and everybody sort of in their stance, in their corner, and just waiting for the other person to change. And then you hear that, nobody's changing. Everybody's pretty much stuck in their belief system. So yes, I love this idea, and looking at it through the lens of the family system. So let's start first. We're going to get through that and pull that apart, because I think that might be something that needs to be further explained. But first tell me, and maybe you said it in part there, but why did you write this book, American Therapy?
Yeah. Many reasons, but I had trauma in my own childhood that I spent quite a number of years doing therapy and healing. And it was a profound experience that changed my life. I grew up at a time where people didn't talk about psychotherapy, and so I just thought I was a flawed person. And I think there are many people out in the world who are symptomatic, who are depressed, who are anxious, who are addicted, who are raging, who are isolating, who are highly aggressive, who don't understand why they are the way they are. And I think the same. So as I worked on myself and kind of came out the other side, and there is light at the end of the tunnel, and I could really presence that for people. There's light at the end of the tunnel, and we need each other to heal. This is not a solo journey for the most part. For most people, we need each other. We got hurt by other people, and we heal with healing, safe, loving, wise people supporting us. And so basically just sort of extrapolating my own experience, realizing that there's millions of people in the same boat that I was in, and suffering from all kinds of trauma or hurt from other people or other systems of people, and who don't have access to help and don't have access to understanding themselves. And so they just repeat and repeat and repeat their own internalized trauma, which is what I was doing. I wasn't in a healthy relationship. I was depressed, I was anxious, and I kind of, traveled my little path of survival, which is what we all do. And for many people, that path of survival is very dysfunctional on a social level. It's one thing if your way to survive is to become a workaholic, and it's another if you fight everybody who comes along, or you become highly aggressive, or you become an addict and you can't take care of your children. So it just made me realize that we have to look at America as a family system. If my family had gotten some kind of help, I'd be a different person. If the family of America got help and really understood psychologically what the dynamics of our policies and practices are, some of them, we could help millions of individuals live much safer, much more provided for, much more loving, much more functional and cooperative lives, if that was our agenda. And I'll just say two things really quickly. In an abusive or neglectful family, that's not the agenda. The agenda is for the person in power to stay in power and to do what they want. And that's also true for larger organizations. And so there's huge issues on a family level when we're looking at an individual family or the family of America to address. I just want to throw this one thing in really quickly, because I know our time is limited. I want to say that the beauty of psychology and the beauty of psychotherapy is it's not partisan. It's about healing relationship. It's about healing the relationship with ourselves, and it's about healing our relationships with other people and bringing the divides together, building empathy, building deep understanding, making agreements, taking responsibility for ourselves rather than pointing the finger constantly at other people, making the changes we need to change rather than demanding somebody else always make the changes. And these principles, were they applied to larger institutions in our country, would change our lives.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's a mouthful. I'm glad we're recording that. That's fantastic. And yeah, you made me think about, I talk a lot about with my clients and on this podcast about the journey of therapy being this ability to understand that you're not broken, that you're not
Right.
irredeemable, but that you feel the way you feel because of what's happened to you. And
That's right.
so no baby infant is born insecure or anxious or traumatized. And eventually, because of what happens to us, and whether it's abuse, trauma, on a scale of, whatever, or you've just been hurt, and chances are you're going to be hurt because life is hard, right?
Right.
So
Exactly.
I love how you're weaving that kind of individual idea into this more global, countrywide idea about being a family and the way in which we behave coming from our wounds, and looking at it in that big sort of lens that way. So how can how can we, by using this understanding of the family, because everybody has a family or has come from a family. So I think
Mhm.
everybody out here listening can say, yeah, I understand how a family works. There's, the uncle that maybe isn't as great, or the mom that this and that, or dad had this happen to him, so he's going through this. So everybody understands that family idea. How do we take that and have that somehow help us understand how to heal this view sort of what's happening in America right now with the divisiveness?
Well, there's two ways to look at it, and I try to address both because I think that that is really relevant today, both in our own families and in the larger picture of the family of America or even the world. And that is that to some extent, one of the most powerful contributions anyone can make to their smaller circles or the world, the country or the world, is to do their own healing work. Because
Mhm.
when we do our own healing work, and I say this over and over again, and I would imagine you have found the same thing, and that is that when someone really does heal the worst effects of trauma, not that it might not still impact your life in some ways and still be something you manage, um, but when we've sort of come through to reconnecting with that beautiful person that we were born to be as that innocent baby, um, I have never seen one person become more violent, more hateful, more divisive, more uncooperative. When people heal and they find that inner essence and they connect to it, they have a source of love and understanding that they bring into the world around them. Perfectly? No, because none of us are. And sometimes we take two steps forward and one step back.
Mhm.
Um, but there's a place to come back to inside where we know what it feels like to be seen and to be cared for. And we tend to bring that to other people the best we can. So the
Mm.
more we heal on an individual level, the more we bring that to our country, the more we bring that to our schools, our workplace, our places of worship, our state, and our government. And it determines, to some extent, who we want to see be in positions of leadership. And on the other side, the reverse is true when people are really acting out their wounds and they haven't had a chance to heal, and they've either become highly aggressive, or and there's two main things, and I wonder if you see these same patterns. There's lots of symptoms of dysfunctional families, but the two patterns that I see the most are learned helplessness or identifying with the aggressor. So people tend to become either more helpless and passive and easily controlled, or more aggressive because they don't want to feel their vulnerability, and they become the aggressor themselves. And then you have more and more people who become aggressors and more people who become passive. And I think this is playing out in our country, actually, this whole pattern.
Mm.
Um, and then one of the other dynamics is also that people in power who misuse power often reward those who will um, comply with them and take their side. And we have a lot of that going on in America. So these are huge psychological dynamics. So the point, if I can get back to your question, is I think we need to heal ourselves and really invest in healing ourselves. And advocate for mental health being a top priority and access to health care being a priority. But we need to heal from the top down as well as the bottom up. So I talk about the microcosm and the macrocosm, because if the family system is ill, it keeps traumatizing people or hurting people. And we know that from looking at the individual family. One person might be relatively strong, aware, intelligent, but if they're being beaten, they're going to be symptomatic. If they're being, if their resources are being withheld from them, or they're being targeted because they have darker skin, or they're an alternative sexual identity, or whatever they are, they're going to feel the effects of that and have symptoms. So we have to look at what the larger family system is espousing and enacting and creating as policy if we really want to heal also on the individual level. And it's an interplay. And I think we just have to look at it as the microcosm and the macrocosm are now intimately connected and affecting one another.
Mhm. Yeah, I yeah. I'm right there with you. This is fantastic. Fascinating. It's not fantastic, it's happening, but it's fascinating to think about it this way because it gives, as you're talking, I just feel like I'm having all these connections and understandings about conversations I've had with people and the way in which people behave and act around the larger kind of issues that are happening in
Right.
the country right now and in the world. Um, and it's also thinking about this idea of healing ourselves, because what I was thinking about when you were saying that, this podcast exists because I got tired of hearing people um, talk about therapy in ways that were so incorrect. And I realized that most people think about therapy from their experience of seeing it on the movies or in the movies or on the TV show. And that unless you've been through it or your therapist like us, you're not picking up on, they're not experiencing it. So yeah, you're just going to think you understand it because you saw, a TV show. And so there's this stigma that is still alive and well. I think we're talking about things more, but it's still there. And um, I decided that as a psychologist that I needed to speak up, that I needed to do what I could to try to open up, throw
Yeah.
back the curtain and open up so people could see inside the consulting room and realize what this is. What are we doing? When I graduated, my brother jokingly showed up at the graduation with the foil hat, because he didn't want me to be able to. I'd learned how to read his mind was his joke, and it's just standard joke that we all hear.
Right. Right.
So I really wanted to challenge those beliefs and give people a kind of a window in. And the reason was what you were just talking about, this real need for people to heal. We're not talking that you're ill in a way that
Right.
says, like we talked about, you're broken or there's something so fundamentally wrong with you. It's more of an idea of life is hard, things have happened to you. And just like you, me, and everybody we know, our reaction to that, our response to that, and the way in which we now understand ourselves comes through that lens because of what's happened to us. And unless you think about it
That's
and
right.
are aware of that and notice what, some of the messaging and the self-talk, where it's coming from, you're just doomed to repeat the patterns, as you said earlier. So that's why I just love what you're talking about. And it just folds so well into what I yammer on about every month too. So thank you for that. So you talked about a little bit at the beginning and then now I wanted to come to that. So if we understand this in more of a family system sort of lens, as you talked about, and we think about people healing themselves, you and I both know there are tons of people that just endure their pain
Tons.
for all sorts of reasons.
Right.
The stigma, financial, fear, not understanding, thinking they're just doomed to it anyway. I'm just the type of person that runs anxious. I've heard that one. So not this recognition that actually, no, that's not, you don't have to live in pain.
Right.
So how do we break this cycle? How do we break this cycle and this relationship to abuse and violence that it kind of exists in this? Because not everybody's going to put their hand up and say, "Oh yeah, I'm next in line to be healed."
Right. Right. Well, and again, I think it happens on many levels at once. I think it has to be a many targeted approach. But I do think that just to talk about the stigma for a minute, I think some of the things that we suffer from still in America, even though mental health is talked about more, and we do look a little bit into the mental health of our worst offenders, what happened to them. But that's the tip of the iceberg. And I think one of the things that we have to understand and help each other with to break some of the stigma around mental health is that we still have a big ideal, I think, in America, and I don't know how many countries have this, of independence, I don't
Mm.
need anybody. I'm a self-made man. I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. I really just need to put the past behind me. I can tolerate this. I can prove them wrong. Whatever it is, that is a very isolating mentality. And
Yeah.
I've had many, many people come to therapy and say, I'm so afraid of being dependent on therapy. I'm
Mm.
so afraid of needing you.
Mm.
And I always say to them the same thing, which is, but you're not afraid to need your computer guy. You're not afraid to need your car mechanic. You're not afraid to go to the doctor, to need the doctor when your appendix is bursting. What is it about mental health that all of a sudden brings up this terrible fear of being dependent on another human being? And
Yeah.
so I think we just have to break that stigma that we actually need each other. And the truth is, we really do if we look at it on a very basic biological level. We're wired for love and connection.
Yeah.
And love and connection, among many other positive things like that, are the best food for human beings. And when we don't get fed love and connection and cooperation and valuing, and the big one here also is nonviolent conflict resolution skills, are people who are committed to nonviolent ways to resolve conflict. When we don't get these things, we become mentally hurt. I like to say unwell because, still mental illness sounds like you have some horrible diagnosis. But
Hmm.
we're really mentally unwell in many ways as a society because we don't espouse the best family values that actually help create people who are well, who are functional, who are contributing peaceful members of our society
Mm.
for themselves and for others.
Yeah. And you don't have that, just shining the light specifically on families, having grown up in maybe an abusive family, which I've been very open
Right.
on this about my own. I have my own history with an abusive alcoholic father. So you don't grow up with the example of it. So
You don't.
had I not done my work, in my mind, I remember the conversation when I left home. It was my brother saying to me, well, I just thought that was what everybody had going on. Like they thought
Right.
that was normal. And
Exactly.
so you grow up with this idea, well, this is how it is. And so
Right.
then you just recreate it in your next, the little family you create. Um, so that's it too, isn't it? That we don't have, some of us have not had the examples of good, functioning, supportive relationships up to a certain
Right.
stage in our lives. And so we don't even know
Right.
how to look for it or create it or behave in that
Uh,
way, right?
100%. And what I would say, just to highlight that, because I totally see the same exact thing, is that if you grew up with an abusive alcoholic father who was, I don't know if he was raging or however he was, but if that's your role model, and you adapted in some way to try to avoid as much abuse as possible. Sometimes kids become pleasers, or they isolate, or they fight back, or they leave home, they run away, or whatever they do. Um, I had a client who told me she had a raging father, and she told me that she would just try to make him laugh because the more she could be funny and make him laugh, it would put the abuse off. But it never stopped the abuse; it just
Mm,
delayed it, right?
yeah.
So we come up with these adaptations, and then we're like in a rut in the road. This is how I know how to survive. I'm Most of us are drawn to what we already know because it's familiar. So I go out into the world. I meet someone who mirrors that parent who hurt me in some way, and we're like a hand in a glove. You
Hmm.
behave in an abusive way, and I do my old dance with you, and I've recreated my past over and over again.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of what's going on in our country today because the role models of many of the people who are at the top of the news are very, very unwell role models. They're highly conflictual, name calling. There was a headline in the newspaper the other day. I won't name names, but it was like, so and so was emasculated by so and so.
Mm.
Huge national figures. what kind of a role model is that for our young people in the family of America, let alone the adults?
Yeah.
And this is from the top down. So that's why I say the microcosm and the macrocosm are inextricably woven together. And the more we heal ourselves, which is what each of us can do. And if one of us has, a huge sphere of influence, great. Take this out if you're the head of a corporation, take this psychology into your corporation. If you're just dealing with your family and your neighbors, it's still good. You can
Yeah.
contribute by healing your human relations.
Yeah. I love that whole idea about, and I don't think you said it here. I listened to you on a couple other podcasts, which were great. I think you said, just about this idea of, needing each other, and the fear around that is understandable. I'm
Right.
hurt by an aggressive, alcoholic male. I'm going to be fearful of that. And
That's right.
I always call it this, the sweater of familiarity, even though you
Mm,
don't want to, you
you put
know,
it on,
you put
right?
it on because it's familiar, right? It fits you
Mm-hmm.
just right. It might be raggedy and have
Right.
holes and smell, but man, I feel familiar in this, and therefore it's weirdly comforting to fall into a familiar pattern, even when it's
Yeah.
dysfunctional. It's weirdly kind of comforting. And I always tell people, I think we're misplacing the word here, that it's because it's familiar, we think it might be good. And sometimes it's the familiar in it is actually very painful. And you're
Right.
just recreating. Now,
Because part of that,
go
oh,
ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead. No.
No, I was done.
I was going to say part of that attraction to the familiar is the child in us still wants love from the abusive parent or the neglectful parent or the missing parent. They still want love. And so part of the attraction is this time I'm going to get it from that parent. You may be like my parent, but this time I'm going to make you love me, or that
Mm,
will resolve my pain. And that is an unconscious, usually, impulse.
yeah,
Um, but I did want to pick back up on one thing because I talk about the same thing, what you said about dependency, that I think is really important. We are wired to be dependent, to connect, and
yeah,
to love, and to feel a sense of belonging. That's actually how a species survives. There has to be enough connection for us to take care of each other to survive as
yeah,
animals, even. Um, but the problem that's so huge with abuse and neglect is exactly what you said. It's not safe to depend on someone. If the
yeah,
person you depend on growing up hurts you, then you can't feel your dependency without being at risk. And
yeah,
that's what people then carry out into their lives. I don't want to be dependent on anybody. So when somebody comes into therapy and they say, I don't want to be dependent on you, I get it. It wasn't safe to be dependent. And so
yeah.
part of our job with each other, and we don't have to be therapists to do this, is to make it safe for people to depend on us. That's
I love
hugely
that.
healing.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Which leads to, because I never, I want to end this on, because I wrote it, the last thing, after I looked at your bio and listened to some things you talk about. This is a hopeful message that you're trying to get out there. You're not saying, oh, we're all doomed because we're all in a dysfunctional family, because we know now with research that we know so much more now about. I mean, there's a lot more to know, but we do know that the brain is incredibly elastic and can change,
Right,
can never stop
right,
changing. And
right.
so to me, that's an incredibly hopeful message, because that says nothing is
Totally.
hardwired. I can absolutely work on, the chatter that's going on in my brain. And when I feel particularly aggravated or triggered or whatever's going on for me, I can check in with that messaging, the way in which I perpetuate it with the way I talk to myself.
Right.
So I feel like there's such a hopeful message in this, um, in thinking about it this way. And like you just said, you don't have to become a therapist. You don't have to run for president. You can
Mhm.
take care of yourself and the people in your circle. So let's
That's
end
right.
this on a hopeful note. And how do you
Yeah.
see that manifesting in communities, and then in the broader, well,
Yeah.
starting actually individual and then to communities and then broader?
Yeah. I mean, beyond what we already talked about in terms of if you're really suffering from something, allow yourself to get significant help and know that actually it's not a sign of weakness. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's actually takes courage and strength to do the work of healing yourself.
Yeah.
It's a hero's journey or a heroine's journey. It is not for the faint of heart at all. And I think that's one big misconception that we have to address. But just, outside of even the therapy realm, I've told this story many times, but it comes to mind and I'll tell it again. My husband and I and my adult daughter were having dinner at a restaurant one night, and the waitress was clearly in a bad mood and very unfriendly. And it was, it was a little annoying because, you go out for a nice dinner and you have somebody with a sour face kind of coming to your table and whatever. And, we could have said we'd like different waitress or whatever. But my daughter looked up at her and she said, "Are you having a bad day?" And the woman just transformed. It's like somebody saw her, somebody cared. It was that little of an interaction, just looking her in the eye and expressing concern for her rather than being so focused on ourselves and our experience.
Yeah.
And it changed everything. And I don't, I think she said yes or, whatever she said, but whatever, it didn't matter. It was like being met where she was by someone who cared, changed the whole dynamic. And we can do this for each other. We can do this in the grocery store. We can do this anywhere. We can just be kind to one another. It's that simple. And I love to say it this way. It's free. It costs nothing and it's priceless. And you know yourself, and I would say this to anyone, if you are the person who's the recipient of someone else's random kindness or just, attentiveness, or they greet you with, a smile, it feels good. It changes
Yeah.
your day. And we don't know. And this is the part I really love to add to this. I've had so many clients that have had really severe abuse and neglect. Much more than we would probably like to imagine here in America. Terrible childhoods. And they're holding on by the skin of their teeth at work, with their families. And we don't know if that person's our waitress. We don't know. Maybe it took everything she had to get to work that day.
Yeah.
And who knows what that one kind interaction did. Maybe she took it home to her family. Maybe she was a little bit easier with her kids or a little bit more loving with her husband. We don't know the ripple effect of our behavior. So if our behavior is hurtful, if our behavior is judgmental or critical or cruel, or rejecting, that has a ripple effect too. And so all the kindness that we can bring into the world that we live in, all the deep understanding, all the taking a deep breath and just listening when you disagree. There's a million things I could add to this, but I know we don't have time to do that. But even just starting there, like, be aware. How am I with other people? Am I with other people the way I would want them to be with me?
Yeah. And I love your daughter sounds like a very
She is.
empathetic individual, which is lovely. I love that because the impulse would be to match mood with mood, right? She's
Right.
having a bad day, so you guys are rude back to her, and then it just perpetuates this kind of uncomfortable meal. Like you said, you wanted to have a nice night out. The whole thing kind of gets ruined because now you've risen to her level, and now everybody's
Right.
cranky. Yeah.
Right.
Instead of, as your daughter did, step outside of herself. Don't think about how this behavior is making me feel, and actually look
Exactly.
at this as a person and ask her. Um, and I love that this simple question. She didn't need a PhD to do that. um,
No.
and the simple question that allows, as you said, that waitress to be seen, and it diffuses
The
the
whole thing.
feeling. Yeah, because there's the connection right there
Right.
that's saying, I
Right.
see you.
Right.
Are you okay? Because I see you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's not like your daughter fixed whatever happened. And I'm sure you don't
Right.
even know what was going on for her.
We don't.
It was just about being seen and about being heard. I think therapy really comes from that. The roots of that is
Totally.
that everyone deserves to be seen and heard and validated for being an individual, just validated for existing, and that it's I'm glad you exist, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like, you're here talking to me about this topic. I'm glad that you exist, that you wrote this book, and that you and I could talk about this. Such an important point right now. And it makes so much sense to me, because I always think with clients, we always think, I've been doing a lot of talking about New Year's resolutions and why that behavior doesn't stick, and telling people, talking about the fact that behavior is the last thing. Behavior is what you do as a result of how you've thought about it,
Right.
what,
Right.
everything else that's going on, how you've gone about the system of trying to make that change, and all kinds of things come from your perspective and your belief in yourself that eventually end up leading to that behavior. You can't just say, "Oh,
Right.
I'm not going to do that anymore." Well,
Right.
you got to think about why you're doing it. And so I love this just simple, hopeful message that we can try to show up for each other in a bit more of an empathetic way, on a much smaller scale than I think anybody thinks. But you imagine if that message got spread across, that people would do that more often, what a difference it could make in just the general psyche of how people are understanding their reaction to what's happening right now, instead of just getting caught up in it, you know?
Right. Right. And
Yeah.
not just seeing people for their symptoms, but knowing that inside their symptoms, whether it's they're shut down, they're walled off, they're critical, they're aggressive, they're whatever, that inside the worst symptoms is a really hurting person.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Well, if you're hearing this, I hope that you can hear the hope in Phyllis's message. And I hope that, when does the book come out, Phyllis?
In July.
Oh, in
In
July.
July.
Very
Yeah.
exciting. Well, I'm in
Yeah.
line. I'm in line for it for sure. Um, and we'll have that in the show notes so people can they pre-order that?
They can pre-order it now on any of the major book sites. It's
Okay.
it's up and available.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Great. And
Yeah.
I'll have your whole name and spelling of all that in my show notes too, so people can know how to search for it. Anything else and how people can find you? Are you
Yeah.
seeing patients in your area? What's going on there?
I'm not seeing anyone anymore on an individual level. I'm really focused on writing and my book. I've pretty much retired from my practice, but I'm totally available to talk. If someone has questions, or they want some direction with what I'm talking about, and please visit my website. There's lots of information. There's podcasts on my website and on YouTube where I talk about lots of different things. And I'm really happy to connect with anyone. I'm just not doing psychotherapy anymore. And there's a
And
place you can contact me.
what's your
It's
website? Is it?
it's my name, phyllisleavitt.com, www.phyllisleavitt.com.
And
And it's
like I said, I'll have it in
PHY.
the
Yeah.
show notes, but it's
Yeah. Perfect.
Leavitt. Is that right?
Right. Right. And
Yeah,
it's Phyllis with 2 L's and 1 S, because you can spell these names all different kinds of ways.
that's
Yeah.
true.
And I'm really, really happy. Sign up for my newsletter. I'm going to, one thing that I want to say is that I'm just about to launch a free PDF it's called the 6 secrets of repairing relationship after conflict. And so that's going to be a free PDF that's available through my website. It's not up yet, but it should be up soon.
Great. Okay. Well, by the time this airs, I would imagine it will be. So
Okay, great.
that's great too. Thank you for that. All right. Well,
Yeah.
thanks again. I know I've thanked you, but I just really enjoyed this conversation. I think we could talk a lot longer, but
Well, thank you so much. Thank
all
you.
right.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
everybody know that everything about Phyllis is going to be in the show notes. And as usual, you can reach out to me if you have questions specifically about it or anything else. And thanks for listening, and I'll see you next month.